Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Martin, and welcome to this webcast on teaching students to be engaged in the transition planning process. It's great to have you here. This is an important topic, and we have a lot to cover. But before we delve into the content itself, allow me a couple minutes to tell you about who I am. I'm a graduate of the University of Illinois. I received my doctoral degree in special education from the University of Illinois. And when I was there, I studied what we now would call secondary transition education. Since getting my doctorate, I've worked at 3 different universities. The last 20 years, I founded and I held the Zero Family Chair, and I directed the Zero Center. I was a professor in the Department of Educational Psychology, and I taught in the special ed program. I taught transition courses, transition assessment, basic transition education practices. Over the years, I've done a lot of research in transition education, developed materials, curriculum materials, assessment materials. And I've basically spent my professional life focused on secondary transition education, and especially the concept of self-determination and how we can infuse self-determination methodology into our assessments and instructional materials. So having said all of that, let's get started on today's topic because we have a lot to cover. So here we go. Got to press a couple buttons first, so bear with me. There we go. Many thanks to the Illinois Center for Transition Work for sponsoring this webcast series at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign campus. The title of today is Teaching Student Engagement in the Transition Planning Process. And I am, as I already mentioned, my name is Jim Martin. I grew up in Illinois, by the way. I grew up in East Central Illinois. Worked there till I was into my late 20s, and then began my career in higher education. So today we're going to cover several things. We're going to begin with a quiz to tap your knowledge, to tap what you know about the topic. So I entitled that, Do You Know? Then we'll look at the spirit of idea. We will talk briefly about the self-directed IEP. We'll examine the I'm Determined set of materials. We'll look at other materials because there's several materials now that are available to help to teach students to become actively engaged in their transition planning process. Then we'll summarize all this together into a nice package. So here we go. Quiz time. You ready? Teacher-directed IEP meetings. What % of time did these people talk? These are the typical secondary transition IEP meetings, teacher-directed. What % of time do you think the special education teacher talked? General ed teacher, administrator? What % of time do family members talk? On average, do these different role people talk? Support staff, counselors, rehab counselors, career technology people who may come to the meetings. What % of time do students actually talk at their secondary transition IEP meetings? How about no conversations, multiple conversations? Ever thought about that? Well, we did, and so we observed many different IEP meetings, and every 10 seconds, we kept track of who talked and what they talk about, the general topic of what they talked about. And here's what we found. We found that special ed teachers talk 50% of the time. We actually kind of, as a research team going into this, we thought that special education teachers would talk more than that. And so we were surprised when the data on average turned out to be exactly 50% of the time. And you can see what the other role % of times were. Family members, 15%, general ed 9, administrators 9, support staff 6. You know how you have a meeting that's going along just fine, and then the people over to your left begin talking about what they're going to do this weekend. The people beside you are starting to talk about what they're going to have for dinner tonight, and this person over here is just being silent. And we call that multiple conversations. Those happen 5% of the time. Students talk 4% of the time. Think about that. Now, whose meeting is this? Well, if you said the students, is it really the students' meeting? The students talk 4% of the time. What's clear from these data, and probably our own experiences as well, is that adults talk to adults about the students. We kept track of who people looked at when they were talking. And even when they were talking about the student, they seldom looked at the student. They usually looked at the person who began the meeting, the person who sat at the head of the table, if there was a head of the table. Students were there about 75% of the time, but clearly they were a non-team member. They had the lowest contribution of any other team member. We also examined this a little further. We wanted to know what percent of time did these people talk about transition. So we divided it into transition conversation, non-transition conversation, and we kept track of time, the percent of time people talked about transition. And look at this. Special ed teachers, 50% of the time. General ed teachers, 4, administrators, 8, family members, 8. Support staff, that's an interesting one. Several of these meetings had a representative, could have been a rehabilitation counselor, a representative from the local career technology center. When those people came, they asked students directly questions about what they wanted to do after school. So support staff talked quite a bit about transition relative to all the other roles. And students talked 10% of the time about transition. Little better than overall, but still. Is that what we would think if this is a meeting to plan what students are going to be doing in the future? Is the student actually engaged in that process? Well, the data tell us maybe not. Maybe not. They're kind of passive recipients of adults talking to adults about what the student will be doing when they're out of high school. We also looked at what team members thought about different things. So we asked several questions of team members. And what two people did not typically know the reason for the secondary IEP meeting? The two people, the two team members who didn't typically know the reason for the meeting. What do you think? Students, followed by, drum roll please, general education teachers. So the two newest role members to the IEP meeting didn't really know the reason for the secondary IEP meeting. Who knows what to do? Who knows what to do at the educator-directed IEP meeting less than anyone else? What do you think? Students, parents, then general education teachers. So think about the professionals have typically had a lot of instruction, a lot of training in what to do at IEP meetings. Not surprising that students who typically haven't had a lot of instruction of what to do with their IEP meeting, parents, because they're not educators, not special educators, and then general education teachers who, if they're lucky, may have had an intro to special education class, but they really didn't know what to do with the educator-directed IEP meeting. True or false? What do you think? 50% chance of getting this right. When students actively participated in their IEP meetings, they are more likely to be employed and/or enrolled in higher education after graduation. True or false? The answer is true. Think about that. We have a intervention, so to speak, that is highly associated with and predictive of better post-school outcomes. So when we teach students the skills to become engaged in their IEP meeting and provide them opportunities to do this, boy, look at what could happen. More likely to be employed and or enrolled in higher education, the more actively they participate in their IEP meeting. Another true-false question: when high school students actively participate during their IEP meetings, their schools are generally more compliant in the transition sections of the IEP. In other words, if you know this, it's the indicator 13 scores that measure compliance, transition compliance in the IEP. Are they more compliant? What do you think? And the answer is yes, they are. Wow. So as students talk more, the IEP becomes improved and better reflects a true transition meeting, better reflects. So what do these data, what does all this data mean to you? What picture does it paint? Ponder that for a second. These studies were published in the in Exceptional Children. You can see the references here if you'd like to go look at those sometime. Jamie Van Dyke, who I worked with for a number of years, she was a doctoral student at the Zero Center. And she had this brilliant idea to come up with a metaphor. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but a metaphor for the teacher-directed IEP meeting. And it's an article that we wrote called "Why is this Cake on Fire?" Inviting students into the IEP process. Allow me a second as I read to you the beginning of this article. Are you ready? Here it is. The birthday party. Imagine being a small child and hearing your parents talk about your birthday party. You hear the excitement in their voices as they talk and plan, starting with the theme for the party, deciding whom they will invite, and then figuring out who will do each job. As the time draws closer, you hear more and more conversations about your birthday party, so you know it's coming soon. And then your birthday party comes and goes, but no one ever invites you to your birthday party, Maybe they just forgot to invite me, you think. The next year, you again hear your parents discuss your birthday party. Once again, you hear the excitement in their voices as they talk and plan, choose a theme for the party, decide whom they will invite, and then finally appoint someone to be in charge of each job. Again, as time draws closer, you hear more and more conversations about your birthday party. And so you know it's coming soon. And again, your birthday party comes and goes, but no one ever invites you to your birthday party. It must not be important for me to be there, you think. It must not be important for me to be there, you think. The following year, you once again hear your parents talk about your birthday party. You barely notice the excited tone in their voices as they decide on another new theme, make the invitation list, divide the job. As the time draws closer, you barely listen to the increased conversations about your party. Again, your birthday party comes and goes, but no one ever invites you. Now you think that birthday parties are not important at all. Several years later, when you become a teenager, you barely catch a snippet of conversations about your birthday party. But since you've never been invited to your parties, you know that your presence there is not important. You believe that birthday parties are not important at all, so you do not pay any attention to your birthday parties. By this time, but this time you receive an invitation to your party. You're surprised, confused, and even scared. You ask your parents why you received an invitation this year. They say, well, you are a teenager now. You were old enough to help with everything that a birthday party involves. Each year we start with the theme for the party, decide the best way to represent that theme. Then we will make the invitation list, decide who will do the different jobs. Now that you are a teenager, we thought you would like to become involved. But I've never been involved, and I don't want to be involved. I don't want to be there. Now think about this in terms of an IEP meeting. Didn't Jamie do a nice job with that? And so that's how it is with an IEP meeting. When students become transition age, they have to be invited to their IEP meeting. But when we begin to do this, so many students don't want to do it, just like this birthday party analogy, because they've never been there, they've heard of it, they think people get together and talk bad about them in many cases. And if they do come, they don't want to be there. If we think about the typical IEP meeting, and here you are, a 14-year-old, and you got invited to come to your IEP meeting. And can you pick up on the hesitation, perhaps? Think about the IEP meeting. When a student walks in, it's their special education teacher, a parent, maybe both parents or grandmothers there, the general education teacher, typically in the class where they struggle the greatest, is there. There might be a rehab counselor there, perhaps an assistant principal is there, and the student walks into that meeting. I mean, by definition, school hasn't been the most successful place for the student. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be in special education. And now they walk into this environment. Wow, I can't blame students for not wanting to come when they reach transition age to come to the IEP meeting, because it can be an intimidating place. And that's why it's so important that we don't miss the opportunity to teach students, become involved, to teach in the process, and as much as possible in your districts to begin engaging students in their IEP meetings early on. Some schools start as early as grade school, 3rd, 4th grade, to get students involved in their IEP meetings, and then it just goes that way throughout school. And then when they become transition age, they know what to do with their IEP meeting. And in fact, some of us think that's what the spirit of IDEA means. When they come into the IEP meeting when students reach whatever the state's transition age is, we should expect them to know what to do and not just to show up and have no background. So what we now know is that student involvement in the IEP meeting is very important. And as we mentioned earlier, districts with higher level of student involvement in IEP meetings have better post-school employment, greater student enrollment in post-secondary education. And students increase their self-determination skills the more actively they participate in their IEP meeting. It shoots up their self-determination skills. And we know as students increase their self-determination skills, this increase predicts better school performance, better school academic performance. Doesn't teach somebody how to do a quadratic equation, but it increases their desire to be in school and the desire to try harder. Matter of fact, in psychology, self-determination is considered a motivational theory. And increases in self-determination skills also predict better post-school outcomes. The U.S. Department of Education has a process, and we just call it a letter process, where it's typically school administrators or the attorneys for schools will write the Office of Special Education about a particular issue or problem as they're trying to interpret of the laws to implement them correctly. And this is one we just call the Dude Letter that was published in 2013. And it was about student attendance at IEP meeting. And what they say, what the Department of Education says in this letter, it says that the parent and student are required IEP team members at IEP team meetings when transition services and post-secondary goals are discussed. IDEA says students need to be invited, but OSEP is now saying that students are required IEP team members. And the IEP team must consider the student's needs, taking into account students' strengths, preferences, and interests. Interesting. So students are required IEP team members. And just like any IEP team members, they need to learn what to do at their IEP meeting. So the spirit of IDEA, I think, is clear, that when students are of transition age, the law says they have to be invited to their IEP meetings. The Dude Letter says that they're required to be there now. And this implies then that students know the language of the IEP meeting, their role at the IEP meeting, what to do at their IEP meeting, and that they're prepared to become actively involved in the entire IEP planning process. But the present situation is this, that many students are clueless about the IEP meeting. Too many students still haven't attended their IEP meeting, or if they do attend, they really don't engage at all. And if you ask them afterwards, what some studies have done, they find that's the last place the students want to be at. And many feel bad after the meeting when they do attend. So the implications are clear. We need to teach students IEP language, their role at the meeting, and what to do at the IEP meeting. And we need to expect students to participate when they do come to their IEP meetings. And that means we need to provide opportunities for them to participate. We could do this teacher by teacher, which has been happening across the country. But what we really need is a system-wide approach where, in a longitudinal fashion, from grade school into middle school into high school, that it just becomes common nature that students are taught what to do at their IEP meeting. They attend their IEP meeting. We expect them to actively participate to the greatest extent they can and with the support they need. And in many places, it begins with one educator who takes an interest, and that it just grows from there. But we've been doing that now for, 25 years. Student engagement in the IEP meeting is now considered a best special education practice and is determined an evidence-based practice. It has to go beyond just one teacher doing this in the building. It needs to be something that is a system-wide approach. Let's look at some examples and non-examples of what this means at the typical teacher-directed IEP meeting compared to when students are engaged. Teachers and parents telling the team the student's interests and strengths. Teachers saying, we gave Johnny this transition assessment and we found that his vocational interests are here and his skills are here. In contrast, the example of student engagement would be students telling the IEP team about her own interests and strengths. The student relaying back what she learned from the transition assessment battery. And then the teacher coming in, the coach coming in and filling in any of the missing spots or coaching the student along. A non-example, teachers and parents telling the team about the student's limits. Instead, the example would be the student telling the IEP team about her own limits. teachers and parents deciding who will attend the IEP meeting, and in contrast, the students inviting those who have to be there and those of her choice to attend the meeting. With parental permission, students have the right to invite others to come to the meeting. Maybe they want their best friend, they'd like their best friend to come, or they would like their favorite teacher to come, or they would like a coworker to come if they're involved in work experience in the high schools. There's no reason this can't be done if parents approve of it. Educators being responsible for attainment of goals. If students are engaged in the meeting and if students are helping to select their goals, then students have to become more engaged in attaining their goals, working on their IEP goals every week and collecting information on their performance so they can feed that back to the IEP team so they can talk about how they did at their next IEP meeting. Makes sense? So here's what a systematic approach would look like. In elementary schools, say in second grade, students come in and they observe and present information about themselves. Don't think a student ever ought to be at their initial eligibility determination meeting, but once we start up with the annual meetings, so they can observe and present information about themselves, maybe stay there for all of it or leave. In third grade, to share more information about themselves, provide information about possible goals they would like to work on, and begin working on their goals so they have a knowledge of what they need to improve on and start doing things every week to make that happen. By middle school years, students need to begin to lead their own IEP meeting, sitting at the head of the table and going through some steps to help engage their involvement in the IEP meeting. With coaching, of course. It's not anarchy, but with coaching, of course, to go through the meeting, to share more information about themselves, to discuss their goals, their progress on the goals from last year, discuss new goals, look at strengths and needs, discuss possible accommodations, and then learn to attain short-term IEP goals each week. In high school, students should be able to lead their own IEP meeting with coaching, of course, share information about their present levels of performance, discuss their goals, discuss accommodations, and then work on attaining their annual IEP and transition goals. But to do this, we have to begin now. We have to start doing this now, wherever students are at, and wherever educators happen to be as well. There are several well-written lesson packages that are available to help students become engaged in the IEP process. And we're going to look at a few of those. At the Zero Center website, and these are available for free for download, it's called the Choice Maker Lesson Package. It's a self-determination oriented lesson package that will help students learn what they need to know to become very actively engaged in the IEP process. The one most relevant for our discussion right now is the self-directed IEP. It's kind of the training wheels, so to speak, for getting students engaged in their IEP process. So the self-directed IEP, when you go to the Zero Center website, you go under Choice Maker, Self-Determination Curriculum and Lesson Packages, scroll down, the self-directed IEP. Intact considers it to be an evidence-based practice, which it is. Numerous studies have found that it increases students' engagement in their IEP meetings. Here's one study, a group design study, that found that it was an evidence-based practice. And a study that was done with Michael Waymeyer and his colleagues at University of Kansas found that the self-directed IEP increases overall student self-determination also. Here's an interesting study that Lee Woods helped coordinate. And it's a single case study, but it really demonstrates the point of what can happen as this is continued year after year after year. We can see on the left, this is Julia's word count during her first IEP meeting after she learned the steps of the self-directed IEP. She was a junior in high school then when she did that. And as you can see, she talked 336 words during her IEP meeting. Then by year 2, she read the implications of being able to direct her own IEP meeting and to help plan for her life really came home. And look at this, she talked just shy of 2,300 words at her next IEP meeting. If you were to watch videotape of this, it's just a world of difference between her junior meeting and her senior meeting, because she realized it's her life to plan. And she had it pretty well planned out about what she was going to do when she was out of high school. She had looked into it. She had made the arrangements. It's a fantastic case example of what can happen as students become engaged in their IEP meeting. So the self-directed IEP materials, there's a student workbook, there's videos, there's scripted lesson packages, and the student workbook will end up with a script that students take into their IEP meeting of logical steps where they can become more engaged. And here are the major steps of the self-directed IEP. State the purpose of the meeting, kind of like this. Hi, everybody. Welcome to my IEP meeting. We're here to talk about how I did last year and to help me make plans for this year. Now I'd like to introduce everybody who's here. My name is Jim Martin. I'm a junior in high school. I'd like to introduce my mom, Mrs. Martin. She's here because she knows me better than anyone, and she's my mother. Next, I'd like to introduce you to my special education teacher, Mr. Smith. He taught me how to become engaged, and he'll help me out today when I get stuck, and he's my coach for this IEP meeting. Next, I'd like to introduce you to my attorney, Mrs. McGillicuddy. Mrs. McGillicuddy is my attorney because I invited my attorney to school. No, I'm just kidding. But you get the idea. So the student will introduce the team, their name and why they're there. And one of the things that we found out when we were observing lots of IEP meetings is very seldom did introductions ever take place. And very seldom did the role of why the person is there ever get discussed. So we want the student to introduce by name and what their role is. Students look at their past goals, describe how they did, and they'll ask for feedback on their goals from last year. Students will state their school and transition goals for this year. We teach students if ever a word or phrase is said that they don't understand, interrupt the meeting and ask a question. Excuse me, Ms. Psychologist, I don't understand what the word percentile means. Would you explain that, please? Deal with differences in opinion. Student wants to do this. Mom wants her to do this. How do we resolve that? We want students to state the support needs they have. At the end, summarize their goals for next year. Close meeting. Thanks everybody for coming. I plan to work on these goals and look forward to having you at my meeting next year. So these are kind of the baby steps of how to become engaged in the IEP meeting. So the self-directed lesson structure to teach of these steps, once you get past lesson 1, there's a cumulative review. It previews the lesson. We teach specific vocabulary. This you might have to, if you use the self-directed IEP, you'll probably have to revise some of the words to match the lingo used in your own IEP meeting. There's a video example at the Zero Center website of a meeting. There's sample situations of dealing with whatever that particular step is we're learning. There's a workbook where students can keep track of what's happening. There's an evaluation phase where students and educators will evaluate what they've learned in this particular lesson. And we end by relating it to personal experience and then create a script for this at their next IEP meeting. Makes sense? Numerous studies, as I've said, have found that the self-directed IEP is very effective in improving student performance at their IEP meeting. There's a website called I'm Determined, and I'm Determined offers a great opportunity to explore many videos of actual student engagement, middle school and high school students. The focus of many of the self-determination student engagement videos is about students presenting their present levels of educational and functional performance. And there's videos that show it using a poster, using a whiteboard, one that you can click on and it moves and it advances, using PowerPoint files, or just sitting down at a meeting talking over who you are with other people. So it really gives you, if you want to learn more about this, encourage you to go to the I'm Determined, just Google I'm Determined, and it will take you right there. So here's some of the things you'll see. Here is a student, looks like an early middle school student who did a PowerPoint presentation to review his present level of performance. And he has a slide up there, all about me. And he just clicks on the board to advance the PowerPoint. There's not much engagement with the crowd, with the other people at the IEP meeting. He's just basically reading from the screen of what's going on. Or we have this high school student who prepared a poster for her present level of performance. And she's looking at the poster as for notes, basically, to take her through her description of her present levels. And here's someone, the lady with the black shirt on, she has written notes. And she's speaking to her IEP team from her written notes. So there's lots of means that we can get students engaged in providing information about themselves at their IEP meeting. One thing that a lot of teachers enjoy from the self-determination I'm Determined website is the rubric, the student rubric for IEP participation. And they'll go through the major steps: IEP awareness, IEP participation, knowledge of IEP content, level 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the students and the teachers can mark how well the student did in doing this and what they still need to learn. We could do this in role play and practice. And as they get closer to their meeting, then afterwards they can score how they think they did. And then, look at improving at the next one. Here is a script from the self-directed IEP workbook that students will prepare as they go from lesson to lesson with the self-directed IEP. And so it's a script that students take in to prompt them through. It's not the only way. They could do a PowerPoint, as we saw, they could do a poster, or they could just take a script in. So students will write a script to introduce everyone who's there. This is my mom, Mrs. Martin. She is here because, well, she knows me better than anybody else. This is my special education teacher, Mr. Johns. He is here because, got the idea. So the major steps of the self-directed IEP are all scripted out, so students have that. So the student will have their paperwork to bring to their IEP meeting, just like what the adult members do. So there's a video that you can download, a PowerPoint video. It's called IEP Team Training, that has been found to be effective to increase student participation in the meeting. And you can download it from the OU Zero Center. It's called the IEP Team Education module. It's about 3 minutes long, You show it at the beginning of the meeting, and it basically goes over the role of everyone who's there and what they need to do to help facilitate student participation in the IEP process. And what we found in researching this is that the self-directed IEP increased student participation. Showing this little team training video at the start of the meeting even had another bigger increase in student participation. Because how do we do team training? We tested this out at a school for the blind, a state school for the blind, and they have IEP team members coming in from all over the state. So there's no way to teach the entire IEP team about what's going to be happening at their IEP team members. So we came up with this PowerPoint presentation to show at the beginning of meetings. And lo and behold, it really worked well because students were given more opportunities than ever before to participate in their IEP meetings. And here's a graphic depicting of this. What we found was at the, with just the self-directed IEP itself, students talked 13% of the time. Special ed teachers talked 41% of the time. General ed 7, multiple conversations 9, others 16. A lot of other people came to these meetings. And then when we use the PowerPoint presentation at the beginning of the meeting, students went up to 18%, a significant increase, statistically significant increase. Special education teachers dropped to 32% of the time, and they went from 41 to 32 because there's only so much time. And as students talk more, somebody else has to talk less. And you can see as we went through this, where that extra time came from that teachers had. The parents talked 5% with the following watching the PowerPoint presentation. Before they talked 5%, so that didn't change. Others talked 6%. Here they talked 18%. They actually got engaged more. So most of the loss in talking came from the special education teacher. There's several other instructional materials. There's the self-advocacy strategy. It's also identified by Intact as a research-based effective practice. It's a booklet. Just Google self-advocacy strategy. You can buy it. It's a part of the KU Learning Series strategy. And a lot of educators tell me it complements the self-directed IEP quite well. It's really looking at things from a very different perspective, but it also works quite well. It costs, I can't remember what it cost. I looked at it a couple of weeks ago, but you have to buy the one booklet. It's not that expensive, and then you can use it over and over and over again. Another package that you can download freely from the OU Zara Center is Whose Future Is It Anyway? Mike Waymeyer, who's a professor at University of Kansas, developed this. It also is an effective practice, and it's another set of materials that you can use. So encourage you to look at both of these and the self-directed IEP and either pull bits and pieces from one of them. You know, what we know is that if you use them intact, they make a major difference in student participation. And I suggest you use one of these as it's written to start with. And then as you do this again and again, students want to become more engaged. So you need to up your game in teaching them and providing them more information as well. This also is beginning to expand to general education. There's a little booklet that if you just type in the Google StudentLed Parent Conferences, it's available from Scholastic. I believe it's free. that it's a little booklet. So general educators, when you have your teacher-parent meetings in grade school, for general educators, where this is designed, it's not just teacher-parent conference, it's student-led parent conferences with the teacher. And if you've never seen one of these happen, it's quite a different experience. This happened to us when my youngest daughter had an IEP. And when she was in, what grade was it? Third grade? I believe it was third grade. Could have been second grade. We got our time for the parent-teacher conference, and we went there. She was mum about what was happening. And we went there, and the teacher, and there were a few other parents and their children were outside. I think there were 3 or 4 other parents outside. And then the teacher opened up the door and invited us all in. And she said, "We're doing parent-teacher conferences a little different now. Your student's going to take you to a table, and their work so far this year is outlined on the table. And the student's going to go through and show you how they've done this year. They're going to talk about areas where they feel like they've been very successful and areas where they still might have some issues. And if you need to talk to me, I'll be floating around from table to table, and I'll be here after we're done with these meetings too." So it was pretty amazing. And then she went on, when she got to middle school, she got taught with the self-directed IEP and became very active in her IEP meetings. So summary is the spirit of IDEA demands student engagement in the IEP process. And what we know is student engagement increases self-determination skills. And students who engage in their transition experience have better post-school outcomes and better school outcomes. And there's ample research-based materials to help teach students to become actively engaged. And students need to be taught these skills, but and equally as important, they need to be given the opportunity to use these skills when it comes time for transition planning. And as we just talked about, general education is catching on to this too. Well, it's been a pleasure to be here to talk to you about student engagement in the transition planning process for the Illinois Center for Transition and Work. My name is Jim Martin. Bye-bye.